So welcome everybody. It's a great pleasure to be chairing this webinar today. Such a fantastic event with some fabulous speakers. We're talking about lessons and insights from the Global Coal Transitions Network workshop. We have some fabulous speakers here. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves in just a moment. But before we get underway, what I did want to do was I wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners on the lands in which we speak. So for me here, that's the Yagra and Turrbal people. And I'd like to extend that acknowledgement to all the lands on which we live and work across Australia and across the world. So, and I'd also like now to introduce the panel. So my name is Tom Measham. I'm the Research Director here at CRC TiME. I'm going to hand now to Julia, if you just want to say a few words of introduction, Julia.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, everyone. My name is Julia Haggerty. I'm a professor of geography at Montana State University. And I'm also serve in a leadership role in the US, something called the Resilient Energy Economies Initiative, which seeks to fund and support research that is looking at strategies for long-term economic resilience in fossil fuel dependent regions. And thanks.
Awesome. Meejin, would you like to just say a few words of introduction?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. My name is Meejin Cha. I'm an assistant professor in the Environmental Studies Department at the University of California at Santa Cruz, and I study labor-climate coalitions and just energy transitions.
Awesome. Przemek, would you like to just say a few words?
I'm Przemek Pluciński from Adam Mickiewicz University, Poland. I'm an assistant professor of sociology. I'm mostly into contentious politics around the European Green Deal, but I was also into energy policies across Europe with focal points to Poland in Poland.
And maybe just before I hand to Andrew, a special appreciation to Przemek, because it's actually 4 o'clock in the morning in Poland. Yeah. It's never easy to get a time which works in, across the world, but this was the best we could do. And Przemek, we really appreciate it. Andrew, would you like to just say a few words of introduction? We're not hearing you, Andrew. Maybe just check your sound.
This should work now. Sorry about that.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm Andrew Curley. I'm an associate professor in the School of Geography, Development, and Environment at the University of Arizona, a member of the Navajo Nation, zooming in from Arizona.
Awesome. So all of us here on the presentation today, we all took part in the Global Coal Transitions workshop, which was in Brisbane recently, and it follows on from some other activities that this network has done around the world, both in the US and in Poland, and actually also in UK. So the idea with this panel was really just to do a little bit of a debrief and have a think about some of the takeaways from that event and some of the learnings. What did we learn about global coal transitions through that process? So the first question, and I might hand to you, Julia, if you want to kick us off. From your perspective, what were some of the key takeaways from the Global Coal Transitions Network workshop?
Thanks, Tom. I think I want to just first say a huge thank you to all of the staff and really all the folks that made the trip possible. We had really just an unbelievably informative and engaged and productive time. No one was bitten by any poisonous or stung by any poisonous things. And I don't know, knock on wood, everybody's home and safe. So it was just a really well organized and exciting event. And it's amazing what we covered, both kind of intellectually and also just practically in a week. So many thanks to for that. And I guess I'll just offer one key takeaway for me, which is just the ways in which coal transitions, large-scale mineral economy transitions in regions are at once like do share a lot of characteristics, and then at the same time are so incredibly context specific. And one thing that is really striking, if I may kind of comment about the Australian context, is that within Australia, the context seems really different from place to place. And so that there's sort of like this really amazing opportunity to learn and see some common trends, and then this deep appreciation for how much what is happening in a particular place really reflects a pretty complex arrangement of kind of the larger policy corridor, the spatial geography, the physical geography, the cultural history of the place. All of these things are going to come together and kind of affect what a regional transition looks like. So really just that appreciation of like how much geography and place really matters, and at the same time how much we can kind of learn and be inspired when we have an opportunity to take the places we know well and hold them up against new places. So I'll just close with that.
Such an important point, and you're absolutely spot on about the diversity of experiences within Australia, and it's something that we see all the time in CRC TiME with the experiences. For example, a couple of places I'm particularly familiar with, so Latrobe Valley and Bowen Basin, they've just got very different experiences, very different types of coal, types of communities, very different industries. Look, maybe what we might do is just keep going with the same question. So, Megan, do you want to sort of tell us a little bit about what, from your perspective, some of the key takeaways or kind of what you really learned from the workshop?
Yeah, I would echo everything that Julia says, and it's really a huge thank you to you, Tom, and to everyone on your whole team. It was such an amazing experience, and I feel like I learned a ton. And we also saw kangaroos, which you promised, which I really, which were great. I think a key takeaway from me is similar to what Julia was saying, but really just the tie to place that comes with coal regions. Andrew and I have talked about how, the differences between fossil fuels, oil and gas regions are very different from coal regions. And this tie to land, I think, is something that is so unique to coal, in a way that I think is not present in other fossil fuel extraction. And for me, when we went to the Bowen Basin, just seeing the scale of the mine, I think it's so important to actually experience the physical, like the visceral experience of being in the mine. And then, you arranged this really, really impactful for me on a tour of a underground mine simulation. And I think just understanding really on like a purely visceral level what coal mining is and what coal miners endure to mine coal was really centering and really important for me. And I think, just the ability to learn from colleagues across the globe is, as Julie mentioned, there are a lot of similarities around coal regions and a lot of differences. And I think just a lot that we can learn as the US, is in a transition away from coal, albeit one that is unjust at the moment. And so it was just a really wonderful learning opportunity, and a big thank you to everyone who helped organize it.
Thanks, Megan. Yeah. And not just kangaroos. We saw emus and we saw lots of animals, didn't we? Yeah. Even some radio on campus.
Giant spiders. Yes, we saw all of it.
Yeah, awesome. So, Shemek, I'm going to turn to you now about some of the key takeaways from the workshop in particular, and thinking also about some of the experiences we've had when we've been welcomed into, where your home ground. We've been welcomed into to Poznan and to Konin and throughout Poland. So thinking about the workshop, what are some of your key lessons or takeaways?
So I would stress two things. First of all, it was already mentioned, the very sense of scale. Since in Poland, most of the coal mining is underground, the very experience of such a huge open pit mines is something special, So, and something so different from European perspectives. Of course, we have both in Poland as in Europe big open pits extraction, but this is nothing to compare with Australia. So this was something new. You can read about it, but only when you experience this with your own senses, you can realize the scale and the environmental impact, but also the relations with communities. Yes, so this is the first thing, and the second would be the First Nations, so the indigenous perspective, which is totally different than in Europe. Yes, so this was. As we experienced this in Brisbane, something really touching, something really new with my European and Polish eyes.
You're thinking to the panel, which we might come to in a minute.
Yeah,
but
both panel, but also the discussion, the discussion part. I mean, I mean that the ownership of the land, the benefits that are benefits for from indigenous communities, and the future, of those communities after coal transitions. So just to realize that those new paths must be taken into consideration to ensure the just and just transition. So this is totally different. So we talk this in Europe mostly from, I would say, from labor unions and workers class perspective, but not from a First Nation perspective. So this is another layer. You have to, which is complex.
Look, we might segue there onto you, Andrew. What are your reflections about the workshop phase, and from your perspective, and take a couple of takeaways?
Yeah, I learned a lot from this workshop, and I'm still processing it as we have returned to the US. And there were some noticeable similarities and differences, and also just being out of place in a totally different world and a different continent. It's you have to do a lot of grounding and a lot of thinking about where you're at. And I'll start out personally and to say that in my own research, when I approached the question of coal mining, I found it to be very daunting. There's been a lot written about coal, just in a general sense or in specific areas. And even framing my own project, I was like, do I talk about it in this broad sense? Do I try to compare what's going on in the Navajo Nation with what's going on in Appalachia? And what I've come to, eventually did was I just really focused on the Navajo experience, and I was like, how is our experience related to this particular kind of mineral extraction, or this kind of extraction, I should say, rather. How is that shaping, our cultural life, our social life, our political life? And that became the basis of my early work. And what this coal network and this particular trip has helped me to appreciate is the variety of experiences people have with coal, and then to make those comparisons that I was too afraid to make when I was doing my actual work, right? To learn from Julia, Mijin, and Shemek, and to think about all of the different experiences globally that are being produced through coal extraction. And what was really interesting for me, and I was thinking about this today, and I was trying to explain it to some Navajo colleagues of mine earlier today, is that in Australia, what I noticed is that you're bringing in a lot of outside people who have a different kind of relationship with the land than Dene people or even at people in Appalachia. And so I think for us that we're coming from the US, we're like, whoa, what is this experience, right? You have to bring in outside laborers, and the relationship between Australia and its Aborigines is different than what we have in the US, and kind of the land status, the ways that indigenous nations either concede or don't concede to those kind of extractive projects. it's very different. And so to me, I'm still, like I said, I'm still processing it, but it was really interesting for me to see that kind of like man camp approach to coal mining, which is, in the US, it's really like justified as like, oh, here's work that you can do locally. Here's well-paying jobs that you can do locally. And here it's like, let's bring in some laborers to participate in this industry. So not to say that there isn't local benefit, it's just to say that the idea of the local, what that means, maybe it's at the state level, which I think is what we heard a lot. That plays out differently than how it does in the U.S. And so it's interesting to see those differences. Anyway, I'll stop there.
Look, really, really good points. And that's also one of the key aims we were trying to do with this workshop is to learn from each other. I remember when I went to Poland, actually, one of the first things which really struck me was how large the labor force was. I was thinking, this is the size of the mine. You have all these people, like, what do they all do? It's kind of the first thing I was thinking, but it's just a different sort of arrangement. And I think that's kind of a really key point. Also, just coming back to something that Shemek said, I think we were really fortunate to have that First Nations Perspectives panel at the start of the event and to really make that clear that had kind of front and center sort of central significance from the beginning, which you were very much a key part of, Andrew, and was led by Caroline Williams from CRC TiME, who does amazing work. We're very lucky to have her working with CRC TiME, and we had some incredible panelists with Jim Walker, who's the chair of our First Nations advisory team. We're very lucky to have such an amazing group of First Nations advisors. And of course, Luana Dynavor, who we met with again when we went into the Bowen Basin from the Barada Mana, who gifted you all a shirt, I believe. I'm actually quite jealous because she didn't gift me one, so I'm going to have to go back and kind of earn a shirt somehow. So yeah. All right. Well, look, that's amazing. That's awesome. What we might do, that was really about the workshop, but I think it's already segueing into the next part of the discussion, which was experiences of the basin, the Bowen Basin, when we went to Bowen Basin as a group. So for those of you who are not familiar, we took about 16 of us total, so it's 13 people through the NSF support, which we are very grateful for. And also 3 people from CRC TiME, myself and Ami and Natalie Brown, who's Program 1 leader. And we went to Emerald, and we kind of drove through a lot of the Bowen Basin. And I think in some ways it's good to see it from the ground. It's also great to see it from the air, by the way, but to see it from the ground, to kind of experience that scale, I think is important. So maybe we follow the same order for now. Julia, if you'd like to share with us some thoughts about the experience of coal mining in the Bowen Basin, both in terms of the mining, but also in terms of the communities.
Sure, and I would just I'll say it's really not up to us as people who visited for a couple of days to say anything definitive about how mining is affecting the region, but I'd love to just like keep this thread of really. And this whole network exists to kind of compare experiences. So like, what did I see as a person that works in the American West and is very familiar with the US policy environment with respect to how we are trying to manage the end of life of industrial regions and coal mining regions, and what did I see in the Bowen Basin? And first of all, is like, I think in the US, we are not very met coal savvy. And so all of our conversations about the coal transition are primarily about thermal coal and primarily about domestic consumption. So you just first have to say like a whole different ballgame, right? In terms of the sort of connected global commodity network that is involved here. And so very different timelines and very different actors, and that's not, I understand there's also thermal coal that's really important in Australia, and there are some regions that are experiencing more the kinds of closures we see in the US. So I'd just say, I guess the thing that really strikes me, first let me just say I'm a head of department in earth sciences, and I want to say the geology was like out of this world. I was not expecting to see a lot of volcanic rock, and the idea that you have all of these precious minerals associated, and as well as these sedimentary basins, that was like wild. So what a rich, literally like such a rich place. But I do think I came home thinking, like, why can the US not solve this problem? Because the scale of kind of everything that we have to deal with, I feel like would fit in a fifth of the Bowen Basin in terms of the size and value of the commodity today, the intricacies of the connected global network. So there's just, I guess I would just start by saying, like, there appears to be a phenomenal amount of wealth in that resource and a phenomenal amount of wealth that is being extracted. And it is in a place which many of the settlements appear to be largely purpose-built for the mining industry. And so it just makes, it's like all the issues that we kind of think about in very stark relief, very like, just very dramatic and very, I want to say like a little bit black and white. And then, yeah, I guess the last thing I would say is that I'm based up in the northern end of the Powder River Basin, and I work with both non-native and native communities that are deeply enmeshed in a coal mining region and the coal economy. And mostly there's, really some really hard stories to tell about what coal has meant for our communities. And I would say that our native communities are in a far better starting place than the Aboriginal communities in Australia near these mines that don't have title to the minerals in the way that Native nations in the US do. It's very complicated and very tricky. Yeah, so I think I feel like I'm not saying anything super coherent, except to say I was really struck by just how dynamic and active and large the industry is, and how much wealth has been generated there.
Thanks, Julia. And I think your points about sort of really being there and really experiencing it, I think, and the geology, I think they're really insightful. Meijin, do you want to kind of take up the question there in terms of how is coal mining affecting the Bowen Basin and surrounding communities, and sort of what you saw as someone coming into the region, and plus the kangaroos as well, and the spiders and all the other things, but particularly about the basin and the coal mining and the people.
Sure, yeah. And I would just, again, I feel like all I ever say is I just echo what Julia said. But again, having spent 2 days in the Bowen Basin, I don't want to say that I actually know, really what is happening or what is the reality on the ground. But kind of comparing also to the American West coal industry, one thing that I was really struck by was the miners' hall that we went to. Because you just don't see, at least I haven't seen that type of infrastructure in the US, where there's a community center that is, a restaurant, a bar, I think a casino, and a playground for children, like to really create this community within the mining community. The wealth that is generated by coal mining is either distributed throughout the state or is done in more discrete ways. So I thought it's interesting when you think about, the possible ending of these industries and what that would do to community coherence if there's something like the miners' hall that is so central, it's seemingly, to socialization within the community. And just, I thought, a really interesting example of how mining gets so integrated into people's lives and to their society and the social interactions. And the other thing that really struck me was when we went on the tour of the mine, and all the time that those folks generously spent with us, was that, maybe it's something that they talk about frequently, but like a way that they approached the energy transition as if, it would be happening and that, coal mining would end, or at least that was the impression it seemed, is just not something you would hear here, right? There's always some revival of the coal industry right around the corner. And I think what that does is it really makes us so far behind in terms of how we can support workers and communities in what we know is a permanent decline of coal mining in the United States. And so to hear coal employees talking about transition and talking about, other diversifying economies was just really interesting to me. I mean, I have some questions about, like whether they really do think that mining will cease in the region, just given the scale of it. But to hear that kind of proactive economic diversification away from the industry is certainly something that was really, really unique. And then again, just standing, I did have this moment, I have to admit, that when we were standing there in the mine, just thinking like, are we ever going to end coal mining? Like I just, you see that scale and you think, how could this ever end? Like, and what would happen to the land that is left behind? And to learn that, there are voids that are not filled, it just was like, I think a good reality check of like, it's very easy for folks like me to talk about like policies that we should do to, manage decline of fossil fuel use. But seeing the reality of it and seeing the scale of it is just a good reality check of like, if we want to really address the climate crisis and we want to end the use of fossil fuels, which I would argue we have to address the climate crisis, this is no small undertaking. And, it's great that there's discussion of economic diversification and transition, but, the reality of like, this is a coal mining region, like that is the identity, that is the history. And whether or not that's the future, I think is still to be determined, but just that kind of realization of what we are really thinking about and dealing with when we talk about an energy transition away from fossil fuels.
Definitely, I think there's some key points there around scale and also the timeframes. I mean, I think as one of the things that Julia talked about was the timeframes. The timelines are different, so it's being able to talk about diversification when you have a way to run for an industry. I think it's kind of it's a different conversation when the industry's closing next year or something like that. But I also just wanted to come back to your point around the community aspect. And so we went to the Moranbah Workers Club, and it really is a family sort of place. I mean, whatever stereotypes you have about coal mine workers, they might be debunked by a trip to the Moranbah Workers Club. It's a place where there's kids running around, there's playgrounds, there's all the generations, and it's a yeah. I mean, I actually love the place. I always go back there every time I'm in Moranbah. Why don't we keep moving? So over to you, Shemek, to talk about your observations about the Bowen Basin and the surrounding communities. Oh, and you're on mute, by the way.
Coming from a totally different context, yeah, I'll be modest with my with my insights. But my observation or kind of a result after several discussions and talks was that there's some problem with community life in Bowen Basin. What I mean by that, so I mean that if my impression is correct, a large portion of this modern labor force comes from outside. Yeah, so not from the Bowen Basin. Yeah, so it is a really problem to build a real sense of community with people swinging each week or each 2 weeks to work and from work and so on. Yeah, so this is something totally different. Yeah, so I will try to relate to Polish context where mining culture was and still is, even if we decarbonize a lot of economy, yes, still is a really strong reality, I would say, with separate and very specific customs, practices, some of them even religious related, and is over a century long or almost 2 centuries long. Yes, so it always needs to be account with when we try to work on economy or societal transformations, and it is taken into account. Yeah, and it was totally different experience for me. I mean, rather different mining culture if we talk cultures and communities. Yes, so I wouldn't say too much, as it was only 2-3 days on site, but it's totally, it would be totally interesting to go deeper. I mean, it would require a really deep qualitative research, yeah, into those communities, their needs, their visions of the future, they waves of life, yeah, and the very process of transformations that needs to be done. So yeah, I will stop here.
Shamek, you're touching on something very important. And so
Yeah.
we went to a region where it's mostly, as you said, it's a labor force which is mostly sourced from outside the region. There are other parts of the country, as we were talking about the differences within Australia, where it's mostly a local workforce. And then there's some other places again where it's a real combination. So the things that you're talking about play out quite differently within Australia. And you're right, it's a very interesting question and topic, and quite different to Poland. Andrew, I'm going to cut you in just a minute, but I have a feeling that Julia might want to make a quick comment. Is that right, Julia?
Sure. Sorry, Andrew. Just, barging my way in as usual. I regret not mentioning like that the industry there is absolutely mind-blowingly successful and impressive. And this is what made me think of it, as I was thinking about being in the miners community hall, and how many women younger than me were walking in their coveralls, in their work clothes, just, grabbing a glass of wine at the end of the day with a maid or whatever they were. And how many women we saw working in industry who are, all of the employees we met, smart, motivated, great communicators, proud of what they're doing. The earth-shaking, game-changing moment for me was going to the coal washing plant. Tom, you'll remember the name of mine. I'm sorry if I get it wrong, but I've never had a tour of a coal washing plant before, and the ability for a few really smart chemical engineers to figure out how to adjust that system to meet kind of make global commodity demand. There's like products going to India and products going to Indonesia that are synced up with like what's coming out of the seam, which is created over millennia of geologic time. It is such an impressive industry, and to be welcomed by the mine engineers and given a tour that was very open and we could ask any question we wanted. I think a really positive thing you have in Australia, and this like echoes back to this theme I think that Mijin was talking about, is that surely there's lots of conflicts that we don't know about, but through CRC TiME and like other partnerships, the fact that industry wants to be in this conversation about depletion of the resource and what's going to happen in the region, and is welcoming and open to these conversations, feels incredibly positive. And with so many talented and kind of amazing workers out there, that just feels like a really rich part of the resource and part of the wealth that's being generated. So I did want to just comment on how much we appreciated that, particularly the mine tour, which was, unforgettable experience of a lifetime, and wholly because of the willingness and the interest of the employees of the mining company to interact with us.
We were very welcome, and partly that's because we've engaged with our industry partners before, and when we've been there, we've shown respect to them, and that includes other people from the NSF and other people from other visitors. We've been there. They've welcomed us back because they've. And I think even someone mentioned that to us when we were on one of the tours in the underground facility. But look, I feel like I need to cut to you, Andrew, because I'm really keen to hear what you have to say about the experience of coal mining in the Bowen Basin as you saw it and the surrounding communities. And over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like I kind of already answered this in my previous answer, but it was pretty much like the number one thing I was thinking about was how people were flying back and forth between the particular coal mining region we were visiting and in the main towns, like Brisbane. And so, being on those airplanes with the people in their suits still with coal dust on, it was really interesting to see that. Um, Similar to what Julie was saying, to me, it was interesting about how young the labor force was. I feel like when I was doing work in Kayenta Mine on the Navajo Nation, interviewing coworkers there, I mean, there were younger people involved in mining, but a lot of the people I ended up talking to, or that were kind of main spokespersons for labor, were older, and maybe that's just a function of the unionization there. And but I don't think that's the whole story. I think there was just an older workforce when you saw the people who were working at the mine site in Arizona, where I was doing my work. And that's a reflection of the different socioeconomic issues at hand, right? A lot of people got into mining where I was doing my research in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, and continue with that work. And maybe in the early to mid 80s is when it hit the peak in terms of new employment and that sort of thing. But a lot of people got attracted to outside opportunities in emerging Western cities like Phoenix, Albuquerque, Denver, Salt Lake City. These are big metropolitan areas that have a diversity of kinds of work. And it's different. It's different in the Bowen Basin. And like everybody said, I can't speak to the particulars of the socioeconomic issues at hand. But you do notice that there is a difference, and the young people are going and working at the mine, which to me, and we talked to one person and they said that the unemployment rate was at 1%, yeah, for the state, which is very, 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 very low. And so that's, it suggests that the mining actually does employ a lot of people. And we think that anyway, so what I was going to say is that because of that, it might be a different kind of question in terms of transition when we're, like if it's easier to talk. Well, let me restart that. When we talk about transition, and Mijin can correct me because she knows the literature better than me in terms of the broader questions of transition. But when I see it play out in New Mexico and Arizona, is often talking about people who have worked many, many years in the coal industry and trying to find work for them beyond that. And so this is a different kind of transition question where it's like, oh, you have actually people in their most productive years, their younger years, working in these mine sites, and and they would need something immediate that is similar to coal in order to find a similar kind of work. And that's very different than like phasing out coal work and retiring old coworkers who have been there for decades and allowing them to go out to pasture, compared to, okay, you're getting people in their 20s and their early 30s and then suddenly they're out of work. I think it just presents a different kind of problem.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, that's really key points. And again, so valuable to learn from different experiences, which is really the point of, I think, what the NSF, the Regional Coordination, Research Coordination Network is about, which in many ways is a kind of a segue to our next question. So our next question is actually, this is the final question to go around on the panel, but we will have some time, hopefully, for some questions and answers. I can see there's a few things in the chat already, some themes emerging, but if you do have questions you'd like the panelists to talk on particularly, please do post them in the chat. So the first question here, well, the last question is, what is the value of the Coal Transitions Network, and what do you see as the future of the network? We've been sort of involved in these exchanges for a little while now, but the current grant which has funded the work so far is coming to a close. But that doesn't mean the network has to end. So let's have a bit of a discussion. What is the value of the Coal Transitions Network, and how do you see the future? So do you want to share your thoughts, Julia?
I absolutely hope we can continue to stay in this mode of learning from one another and making these rapid connections. This particular network has involved 3 international kind of site visits, and I cannot overstate the value of that in a world where we're mostly doing this and everybody's like 2 millimeters tall on the computer screen. There's something just incredibly generative. It makes me, excited to be a scholar. It makes me excited to be a policy advisor in a space when I can be with people out in a place. So I think we have some nodes that can continue, and a group like CRC TiME brings all these connections together. And in each place we visit, we have this opportunity for the convening host to link in not only other academics, but also industry partners and government partners in ways that, I think could be sustained and is super valuable, because like nobody has this figured out. Whenever, Imogen and I are always on we'll be on the webinar circuit in the US, and everyone will say, well, what's your example? Could you tell us how to do this well? And no one has it figured out, because that's not really how global capitalism works. So and these are real people and real lives and real landscapes, and we really need to do the best we possibly can by them. So continuing to just stay in this mode of active learning and active connection, and really staying involved is so important. And the last thing I just mentioned for someone else to pick up on is the interdisciplinarity that comes out of this network, and the opportunities we've had to think beyond economic geography or political science into things that really only other disciplines can only bring to us, particularly the humanities. So I'll just stop with that.
Thanks, Julia. Imogen, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, again, I will just say, I echo everything that Julia says. But for me personally, I think it has been extremely, extremely valuable. Not only to meet international colleagues like yourself and Shemek, but Julia, Andrew, and I have not really spent that much time together beforehand, even though I don't want to speak for Andrew and Julia, but for me. And so just to meet other researchers that are interested in the topic that you're interested in and have those geek out sessions is really rare, surprisingly, in academia. And I think also the difference, I would say, between this network and other networks is that everyone is also an applied researcher. So it's not really about trying to find the theoretical framing or whatever, but really how do we advance a just energy transition, right? How do we really support coal workers and coal communities? And I think, being in the US, you just get so stuck in what isn't possible. We hear all the time is you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do that. And so just being out of that context is just really a breath of fresh air. I want to make sure to say thank you to Max Woodworth and Jeffrey Jacquet, who put together the RCN along with Tom. And it is also a very sad moment for us in the US, as I'm sure many of you know, that we don't even know what will happen to the NSF, let alone government research funding in general. So I'm certainly committed to continuing the network and finding ways that we can work together and keep in touch and keep learning from each other. And really, truly, this seeing other infrastructure is there's just no replacement for it. I have read about coal my entire life, and it just is not the same as when you see an actual coal mine, when you meet an actual coal miner. And so it has really been invaluable. And it is kind of a shame that we are now under this fascist regime that is and full-scale attack on federal funding. But as I like to say, everybody has to die at some point. So hopefully there'll be a future there'll be a possibility in the near future.
Thanks, Imogen. Shemek, your thoughts on the value of the network and how you see the future of the network, or what could it be or what should it be?
I regard the value very high. I mean, this is a unique somehow, I would say, bottom up, even if funded by the US agency. Yes, so we gather a lot of people across the world from different continents who help to organize or shared their research results, but also good practices, policy recommendations. So not only an academic perspective, yeah. So which is very important. and not only for us academics, but also for communities, for decision makers, for policy makers. So this is a really unique network for me, and I hope it will continue. And to me, both streams are equally important. I mean, the academic one, yeah, but also this policy advisory one. So I'd be interested to continue working on some academic outputs. We have a unique perspective to compare. Yeah, so to work on comparative perspective, but also to learn from each other and pass this knowledge to those who need it, yeah, with good practices, with some solutions, but also learn from previous mistakes. Yeah, so this is what the network is about for me.
Really want to echo that, Przemek, and it makes me remember your points around not just academic connections.
Yeah.
I remember when we were in Poland and we were in Konin, and we went to have lunch with the mayor, and we ate this traditional Polish food, which was quite heavy in the stomach, but it was very good to connect. And also we met the artists. Remember we had the artists and we had the economic development people there. And I think it's really key. That was really a kind of a central part of this network for me. So it's the mixing of the research side and the kind of the community and the policy side. Yeah, so that was very, very, very meaningful. Andrew, over to you for your thoughts on the value of the network and also how you see its future, or should be its future.
Yeah, I mean, I want to echo all of the sentiments of my colleagues here. I think that we all benefited from this work over the last couple of years. And I feel privileged to be included. And this is something that the NSF writers, Jeffrey Max, had thought to include me initially in thinking about this. And then, of course, Tom and Amy inviting us over to Australia recently. I mean, it's just been benefiting from the generosity of people who are organizing, space for us to think and work together. And so, the thing that I feel like we connected beyond just the cerebral, right? Beyond just the thinking about coal, and we're experiencing it in a way that we don't really get to experience in our home institutions. I think it was already said that we're kind of a small group of scholars who work on this issue, who works on coal, but in a social science format, right? It is people who actually consider the people and not thinking about it from an energy perspective alone, or think about it as an economic issue alone, but we're thinking about impacted communities. And I think that, for people who work in academia, who have the kind of politics we do, to be thinking about a labor force that tends to be the opposite of a lot of our values, at least that's how we characterize it, at least in the US. It's very few people of us who consider that. And I'm not trying to do that in a way to brag about ourselves, but to say it's a small, isolated community. And I didn't know a lot of us existed out there until being part of this network. I'll say that frankly. I'm not the best scholar. I don't read everything out there. So I didn't know that, people are outside of the Navajo. Well, Navajo people tend to be very myopic anyway. So I didn't know that outside of Navajo Nation there was other. I mean, I did, but I didn't know it well. And things that I've experienced, right? Looking at the legacy questions that we experience in the UK, looking at the power relations that exist in Europe between Poland and the rest of the EU, right? And how they're thinking through those transition questions. And then, of course, thinking about where it exists in the mind and the politics of a kind of a reactionary politics in the US and Ohio during the conference. It was a little bit different there, but and then our recent experience that we're reflecting on, I think this network has been nothing but valuable, and I feel like I've built some lasting relationships out of them with the people here on this panel and people that are in the larger network. And even if the grant ends, the money dries up, there are other ways that we can continue this thinking and experience, and we've already started to do that. In our various academic associations, we've been on panels together outside of this network, but I shouldn't say it's outside, it's a reflection of the kind of linkages that were built out of this network. So I don't know what to say other than get more and more sappy about it, but I really like this network, and I think that its future will continue. I mean, Mijin and I were talking about doing something in the West, bringing out our people out here, maybe the Navajo Nation. There's like aspirations still out there. We feel like there's more to be done.
I would love to visit and to get to know the West and the Navajo Nation and experience some of the things that you've talked about, Andrew, in your presentations and written about in your work. So I think that'd be amazing. Well, that's all the questions that I had. There are a few themes and topics in the chat. There's kind of a theme around youth and around skills and I think that's picking up some of the comments that you made, Julia. If anyone would like to comment on that, I think welcome those comments right now. And then we have one particular question which I'll come to after. So picking up on those sort of themes around youth and around the skills and the dynamism, I think, which I think you touched on, Julia. Who would like to pick up on that theme? Maybe might be easiest if you comment on that, Julia, maybe?
Sure, of course. I'm conscious that I feel like I've said too much. I'm excited to hear what our folks who wanted to listen to us on this webinar have to say. So I'll just say that, I think going back to a theme originally about what is this resource and what is this life cycle, when you're talking about met coal in Australia, you are talking about a resource that appears to have an almost endless future, except for at the particular sites, right, where the resource can be depleted. But we're not getting rid of steel, and met coal remains incredibly important. And so I think what you can see, like, in that youthful optimism about the industry is something that I think each of us, maybe in the US, commented on. Like, I don't want to make gross generalizations, but there's less of that youthful optimism that this is an industry I can join and I can build a great future for my family, and this region is growing as a result of this. So that it just is a really different kind of moment in time in that respect. But one thing that has been true about this network and some of our really powerful moments that we've had in the field and in presentations is just this, it's so trite, but people seek dignity, and a way that people have, gained dignity is through the livelihood that allows for them to provide for their families and for their communities. And so when you have a thriving industry, you get a sense of like what's possible, and how much is at stake when the industry is declining. These are existential issues for people's dignity, and the way that a constructive and productive livelihood is so fundamental to that. And so, of course, this is not the only industrial transition in which that's an issue, but I do really think that that dignity tied to livelihood, and the livelihood feeling productive and feeling valued, is really one of the fundamental things we're dealing with here when we're talking about transition. And that's such a difficult thing to keep. We want to keep the infrastructure of the community alive, and we want to see the town that was built survive. But when that opportunity to sort of have this sense of like hope and dignity tied to work isn't there, it poses some real challenges for what's going to happen in place.
I think you're spot on, and I think that for me was one of the key messages from some of the experiences we saw in the US where coal did close, and particularly where it closed abruptly. And it was a sort of a, yep, that's done, and it didn't honor that legacy, it didn't honor that dignity in those particular circumstances. And a few people have mentioned already the work of Jeffrey Jacquet. I think some of the work that Jeffrey's done and him with colleagues has actually gone back to those places and celebrated that legacy and really kind of shown what that dignity was and that history. And I think that's been very valuable, that work. I think there's a lot we can learn from that. Look, I did want to come to another question, and Shemek, I thought I might start with you with this one. And there's a question here from Rebecca Ray. And the question is, have your minds been changed in any respect from the network's site visits and activities? Have any particular assumptions been changed? So I think that's the question. I'd like to start with you, Shemek, but anyone else welcome to jump in on anything where your perceptions changed or your mind has changed on some things.
It's a hard question, but a brilliant one. But yeah, not really, I would say. But what I mean by that, when I go to a new place for a site visit, yeah, I try to have as less assumptions as I can. Yeah, just to learn, just not to have something already structured in my mind. Of course, I visited places both in the US and Australia. We also hosted you in Poland, but I brought some knowledge from my specific context, but I came to Australia just to learn, just to experience, and just to process. Yeah, so just to have an overview about commonalities, about differences, and there are many, both of them. But this attitude, I would call it's based on a respect to a new context, to experiences, to just to not to judge, yeah, not to produce or have kind of wrong picture, yeah, in very simple words, yeah. So my perspective, I don't know if it's general, just or it's specific. That's my attitude, yeah. So, but I learned a lot, yeah. So and I experience a lot, and I just need to process it with some comparisons towards already introduced policies in Europe, as the Australian perspective is so different at so many levels. Yeah, so yeah. I don't know if I replied correctly or sufficiently.
There's no correct response.
Yeah.
I think it's really crucial to go in with just an open mind and as blank a slate as possible. We're about out of time, but I did want to offer Mijin and Andrew in particular just an opportunity for a final comment. We've sort of just had some questions and comments from Shemek and from Julia. So if you wanted to have a final word or comment on any of the discussions so far as we just close shortly. Mijin?
Sure, and thank you again, Tom, for organizing this wonderful panel. I really like what Shemek said about, we don't study these regions to be judgmental, right? And I think there's a lot of openness that comes. I myself grew up in a coal mining state, and so I think rather than changing assumptions, what has been is just understanding experiences, and that has been really valuable because each context is so different, and yet I think what is maybe the hopeful part is the commonality because it makes you feel less alone. So it's not, these are big problems. These are very complex issues that are very challenging, but it's not that we have to solve them on our own. There are other things that there are people that we can learn from, there are regions that we can learn from. And I really liked, Julia's point about, some of the challenges for our workers is that this dignity issue is really, this dignity is really something that's very moving, and we see less and less of it in work, and we just see a proliferation of low-wage jobs that have no future. And I think that is something that we really have to consider as we transition away from coal.
Thanks, Pigeon. Andrew, any sort of final comments?
I'll quickly say, yeah, I mean, honestly, I do feel like I had some assumptions coming in, and I think those were informed by my experience, right, doing research in the Navajo Nation on coal mining in Arizona, and going into a place like Australia, you're confounded by the differences. I mean, or you're confronted, and then it confounds your understanding. I'll just say more broadly, like in the U.S., or at least in the U.S. up until recently, coal was thought of in this time frame, in this way we think about time and energy. And I don't always agree with it, but I think this is just a popular understanding that it's in the past, right? That it's something that is a past energy technology, and everything else is a future thing. And I think that kind of time chronology that we have assumed into our thinking in the U.S. context is challenged by experiences we see elsewhere, especially in Australia, that we see what's going on with a very extractive heavy region, a relationship to the land that's fundamentally different than what we see, a different kind of labor force, a different kind of socioeconomic status. There's just a lot of more, like, basically I left with more questions, and I've been wanting to think about it and follow up with reading. But so that's where I'm at. I did have assumptions, and I think they were challenged, and now I have a better understanding of what's going on. Not the best understanding, but a better understanding.
Thanks, Andrew. And that's time from everyone. So I'd like to thank all of you once again. It's been so good to spend some more time with you here in Australia, and as we have spent some time together in the US and in Poland, and also in UK. Thanks for a reminder about the UK experience also. And like always with the Global Coal Transition Network, I always feel that we finish something and there's so much more to discuss. I always have that feeling. So, I mean, there's so many other places, South Africa and Indonesia and India, which were themes in the workshop. We actually also need to engage more with these places, as well as China, and as well as all the places where we're seeing these coal transitions. There's so much more to discuss, but we have to leave it there for today. So thank you so much for joining us. Shemek, I think it must be time to get some sleep, or maybe it's already too late for sleep. It's time to start the day. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you again soon.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.